Now,
in the
when they have
beginning.
your individual practice, when each person is practicing the raising of the energy through holding back from going into full orgasm, then the woman would also want to do that too, wouldn't you say?
If a couple is just starting out, in 99% of the cases, the two will be working to enable the man to develop that ability, and
Yes.
that might take a period of months or years.
Yeah.
Hopefully not years,
Yeah.
but it all depends on the intention and the motivation. And the
Yes.
intention is very important in all of this. And as I said before, it's not a black and white situation.
Yeah.
It's a matter of favoring. Uh, and the technique for both men and women is to go to stimulate to the level just before orgasm, and then develop the ability to just rest before the orgasm comes. And once both partners are more or less equal in terms of when they're going to be orgasming, if we could put it that way, then the two can work together. And it's intuitive, it doesn't have to be verbal communications necessarily, although maybe in the beginning it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But the two can work together to rise up to that point where you haven't gone over the edge, but you're sort of getting close to it, and you learn to dance along that edge. And whenever you're getting a little bit too close, then you just rest.
Mm-hmm.
You just rest, not move. And then after a few minutes, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, then you start again. And this technique is called holdback. For obvious reasons, you go to the level just before orgasm, and then you just hold back, just favor not going over the edge. And the man has the most work to do in this area in the beginning, obviously, but then once he gets some control, then the woman and the man both can do this together. So that's basically the holdback technique. It's also been called the valley orgasm technique, because each time you go to the point just before orgasm and then rest, you kind of go to almost to a peak, and then during the rest period you sort of come back down, but you don't go all the way back down to where you were when you started. You come down some fraction of the way, and then when you start to stimulate again, then you go up, and you go beyond the previous peak, but you're still not to orgasm yet, and then you rest at that point, and then you come back down into the valley again, but you're not going down as low as you were last time, and then you're going to a new height, and then down, and so it's like a sawtooth
Yes.
of a rising stock chart, which not too many people see these days.
Right.
But you're going up, and the principle that's involved here is you're developing higher ability for sustaining ecstasy in the body without going through orgasm, and you go higher and higher and higher, and eventually where you end up is a transcendent ecstatic state, which is very similar to meditation or a deep session of pranayama.
We might want to talk about blocking at this point too, because that's going to be an essential part for the male.
Yes, and that's for the man, and that is it's a little bit of a controversial technique, although I haven't found it to be controversial in my life or in the lives of many of my students. And that's, if a man does go over the edge, there is a technique where you can reach around with the fingers and block the ejaculation. And in that case, the semen is absorbed back up into the body, mostly into the bladder. And then after an hour or so, it is reabsorbed back up into the body. It's a technique that, like all techniques, it takes some time to develop it and to develop a comfort with it. And it's really a last resort technique, and it's not a technique that something you would use for many, many years. It's a technique that you would use during the beginning, during your learning stage of staying in front of orgasm.
And it actually gets reabsorbed into the body from the bladder. I thought that the male would urinate it out.
Yeah, it can, and one of the more advanced principles in Tantra, which applies to both men and women, and that's the principle of vajroli. That's Vajroli.
Mm-hmm.
And vajroli, in the ancient yogic text, is presented as a physical technique where a man can actually draw his seed back up into his body after it's been expelled, which is not something, which is not something we teach in AYT. I personally think that it's sort of a macho thing, and it's there's shades of exploiting women in it because there's some bragging that goes on in some of the how should we say, more macho scriptures about not only drawing your own seed back up, but also drawing the essences from the woman. And this is all just, as far as I'm concerned, it's totally has nothing to do with spiritual development. But the principle of vajroli is not about that, in my opinion. The principle of vajroli in both men and women is it has to do with the rise of ecstatic conductivity and a change that occurs in the sexual neurobiology where essences become naturally drawn up into the body all the time as a part of this ecstatic experience that we're having in daily life. So your biology down there begins to draw the energy up not only when you're sexually engaged, but also when you're just walking around, or if you're having an ecstatic moment or feelings of devotion or whatever. And life becomes constantly like that for the person who's ecstatically awake. And so vajroli is the process of reabsorbing sexual energies of the body, and it occurs through the bladder. And through some of the other neurobiology, it comes up into the digestive system and up the spine to the brain, and there's a whole complex process that goes on that recirculates the energy in the body.
And how can you prove that this is actually occurring inside your body? How would you know if it was or wasn't?
Well, it's largely experiential on the personal, for each person, but there are also some observable symptoms. A person can be seen to be ecstatic, obviously,
right.
And there's also some nectar that's generated down from the brain into the nasal pharynx and down into the GI tract. And
so you can taste it.
There can be some symptoms in digestion. There can be some air in the GI tract and some processing of food and air and sexual essences in there that produces the physical symptoms. These are symptoms that are at varying degrees of subtlety, and science has not really come to the point where they're even interested in measuring these things because there haven't been enough people around having these experiences.
Right.
But I think as we go forward, there are more and more people having these experiences, and they're not easy to measure. They're subjectively very clear to the person that's having them, but they're not easy to be measured, but I think that they will be because there is something there that's happening that is biochemical. And so, and I don't think it's really a matter of proving anything to anybody. I think that anybody who takes up these practices, and we're not just talking about tantric sexual practices, we're talking about the full range of yoga practices, which all kind of feed each other. The whole being greater than the sum of the parts of practices. People who do that, they find out for themselves. It's experience based. It's not based on me telling you what it is or reading it in a book or anything like that. It's really a matter of just, hey, here it is. Give it a try. See what happens with these techniques in your relationship with your wife or your husband or your partner, and just see what happens. And see what happens when you add meditation every day. It becomes clear enough to quite a few people.